Welcome, and thanks very much for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. My name is Sean McGrath. I am the Chief Exec of the Entrepreneurial Scotland Foundation, and I'll tell you a little bit more about us in a minute. But I'm really pleased to have the opportunity to speak to you about something that's really close to my heart, which is ESG, and why Scotland is absolutely perfect, why we are the Goldilocks in the world when it comes to ESG. So before I dive into that, what I'll do is give you a little bit of an intro to who we are in Entrepreneurial Scotland. Then I'll take you through what ESG is, and I'll talk to you a little bit about the perceptions versus the realities, why we have such an advantage when it comes to ESG in Scotland, and then also maybe give you a little bit of insight into some things that we are seeing in the supply chain world that might be useful for you. So, Entrepreneurial Scotland. Well, Entrepreneurial Scotland is an independent charitable foundation, and our vision is to inspire and develop the people of Scotland to build the most entrepreneurial society in the world. Now, we're not going to do this. We're going to inspire and develop the people of Scotland to do it. So you folks are going to go out there and make Scotland the most entrepreneurial society in the world. And when we talk about entrepreneurialism, it's important to note that what we mean is people who can think, act, and lead in an entrepreneurial way, a style of leadership, as opposed to actually starting up businesses, although many people will go on to do that. And we believe it's important because actually, if we can think and act and lead in this way as a society, then we can generate the prosperity and the jobs that we need to help Scotland as a whole. So in order to tackle that, our mission at Entrepreneurial Scotland is to build a movement of these transformational leaders, so people who can think and act and lead in this way at every level in every organization, and to combine them with people that want to support them, and there are many people who do, so that together we can generate those jobs and that prosperity for Scotland. So by helping you succeed, you will help Scotland succeed, and that's our job. And we are very focused on the people within that as opposed to the organizations itself. So very quickly, how do we do that? Well, look, we recognize that becoming one of these leaders is a journey, and actually it's a journey that can take a career. And our job is to walk that road with you. And we have interventions at key points. We will step in and provide you with leadership development programs or internship opportunities or all of these types of things to help you become this type of leader. And also to connect you with your peers, to connect you with people who are going through the same journey as you in order to help you. And then connect you with ambassadors, so people who have been there and done that before. So again, it's very much about supporting you to become the leader that we need you to be and that Scotland needs you to be. So enough of a plug for me and my organization. Let's talk about the topic at hand, which is ESG. So what does it stand for? Well, look, it stands for environmental, social, and governance. Everybody will be familiar with environmental. That's climate change, your local environment, where do you get your energy, your carbon footprint. That's right in front center of everybody's mind. And if it isn't front center of your mind, I'd like to live under the rock that you've been under, because it must be a lovely place. From a social perspective, this is where it starts to get a bit woolly. People are like, not so sure what that's about. Well, look, in a nutshell, this is all about the people in your organization, the people around you. So what impact is your organization having on the community that you work in or that your employees live in? What impact are you having on your employees themselves? And what are you doing from a fair work perspective and things like that? And then the third one is where people completely lose the plot and have absolutely no idea what it stands for. So don't worry if that's the case, but it's governance. And what governance stands for is actually, how are you set up and structured as an organization? How are you run? How are you managed? How well are you managed? And also whether you as an organization think about your shareholders, so the people who invested money, or your stakeholders, which is basically everybody who's involved in your organization. And that can be employees, employers, investors, your supply chain, your local community, the government, anybody that has a hand in your organization. And ESG regulations will set down expectations and rules as to how they think people should be operating or what they want to see in each of these three areas. So let's talk a little bit about the perception versus the reality of ESG at the moment. So the chances are, if you have heard about ESG, you've probably heard about it from an ESG investing perspective. And this is really quite tricky and a little bit dangerous. So if, like me, you're old enough to remember the dot-com boom, then you'll remember that everybody was just so excited about internet and what it could do, that if you had any kind of a business that mentioned internet, you were off and away. And actually, the arse fell out of all of that in the end because it was based on nothing really substantial. And there's a risk that ESG investing could do the same thing to ESG. But luckily for us, that's not going to happen, because actually ESG is not just about investing in businesses that have green credentials. It's actually a set of laws and regulations that are being introduced globally. And if you're not aware of it, there are already laws here in the UK that relate to it. So for example, in 2022, there were 2 sets of rules that were introduced in legislation in January that you need to be aware of, that will tell you how you should run your business from an ESG perspective. There's also this perception that perhaps it's maybe a bit of a gimmick. Is it just people jumping on the bandwagon and getting excited about climate change? Not at all. This is a huge issue for procurement departments in larger organizations. So thanks to the new legislation that's come in, if you have more than 500 employees, you need to report on ESG. You need to include sections in your financial statements that will be checked by your auditors, where you talk about what it is that you have done from an environmental, social, and a governance perspective. So this has now become a real issue for large businesses. And if you work with large corporations or large businesses, they're going to be looking to you as your supply chain to help them with this. So just the same as they'll look to you to solve their issues around reliability and the price and the cost of products, they're now going to be looking to you to help them solve their ESG problems and make them look good. So the other aspect as well is that people also think that this is an impossible thing to measure. Well, how am I going to record and measure my impact on society and governance? And do I just do a charity day here, or do I maybe donate something to a food bank and that ticks me off? But that's not actually the case. There are existing frameworks that capture this, and there's new frameworks that are being worked on right now on a global level, a European level and a UK level, that will determine exactly what it is that you need to do, so that you can't fluff it by just doing a little bit here and a little bit there. This has to be something that comes into the very core of your organization and that you think about in exactly the same way as your accountant worries about reporting on your accounts and your taxes and your regulatory affairs from that perspective. So why are we absolutely perfectly placed in Scotland, and what competitive advantages do you have as an SME in Scotland without you even knowing it? Well, look, it's actually really simple. From an environmental perspective, we are so blessed to have access to renewable energy and scaling renewable energy. So we are on track to really grow the access to renewable energy in this space. So in years to come, you won't have to worry about your carbon footprint from an energy perspective, because you will have solid, reliable access to it here in Scotland. There's also an enormous amount of government support going into this area. So this is a huge topic for the government at the moment, not only because it ties into their own ambitions and plans, but because they recognise that to be competitive on a global scale, we need to step up in this space. Now, I was lucky enough to be part of the Economic Advisory Council that helped the government to craft the 10-year economic strategy that we will be following in Scotland. And I can tell you that this concept of ESG nation, of Scotland leading the way in ESG, was right up at the top of our thoughts when we were developing that plan. So from a social perspective, again, this is a difficult one. How do you have a competitive advantage in Scotland? Well, actually, you've got a brilliant regulatory framework here that promotes things like the living wage, promotes fair work policies, and helps you to put that in. And the second thing you've got is a real strong cultural advantage. You'll have guessed from my accent, I'm not a native of this neck of the woods, but in the last 16 or 17 years, I have been struck by the strong streak of social justice that just runs down the Scottish spine. It is built into the way people want to do business in Scotland. It's not something that we have to force you to do. And I can tell you that that's not the case in every country. And then from a governance perspective, well, actually, you're lucky because you live in one of the best regulated parts of the world. You also have access to an enormous amount of green finance. Edinburgh and Scotland in general is a financial capital when it comes to the world, and we're leading the vanguard on support and finance for green initiatives. And then something that's particularly close to my heart is, we invented the concept of social capitalism here in Scotland. Adam Smith and his pals almost 200 years ago literally wrote the book on stakeholder value as opposed to shareholder value. So while the rest of the world think they're moving forward with this, for us, this is actually just about coming home to our roots and something that we created here in Scotland. And you shouldn't underestimate the value of that. So hopefully from an ESG perspective, in summary, you recognize that actually Scotland is incredibly well placed. You as an SME have some distinct advantages when it comes to this, just because of where you're located in the society you operate in. That this is something that your larger suppliers are really going to be asking you questions about and really going to be looking at from a competitive tender perspective. And hopefully you recognize that this is real. This is not a gimmick. This is not some kind of investment trick or brand or trend that's coming. It is real legislation that over the next 10 years is only going to get tougher for businesses to report on. So while I have you, I also wanted to talk to you very quickly about a couple of trends that we are seeing that I think are really important for you as suppliers to be aware of. So very quickly, lessons learned from COVID. So if you work in the services industry, I want you to understand that actually we are seeing a huge shift in people's mentality towards no longer just looking for service suppliers in the country that they work in, or even in the locality that they work in. If you run a services-based business, you shouldn't be worried in the slightest about trying to cross borders, not just within the UK, but further afield to sell your services. People are much more comfortable now with having service providers based internationally. In some instances, it's preferable because you can work in different time zones. Also, unfortunately, none of us will have missed the impact of the Ukrainian war. And it is a horrific situation to be in, but I think it's important for people to identify that actually it has changed everything from a business perspective. So previous to this, we lived in a world that was relatively solid and people didn't have to think about the reliability of where things came from. And that's been shattered. And even if we wrapped the war up tomorrow, it will not go back to normal. People are now alive to the fact that it doesn't matter that you can get something manufactured in China at the cheapest price if you can't get your hands on it, or if you're suddenly going to be operating in a country where sanctions are going to be landed. So now what we're seeing is people in business really talking about, well, actually, it's not just about the cheapest price anymore. It's much more about reliability. It's much more about how likely are the countries within which we operate to be impacted by any further sanctions or further division that might occur. Because what you're going to see is the world drift into two supply chains, one which is a little bit more west leaning and one which is a little bit more east leaning. And for you as an SME in what is traditionally a west-leaning country, this is going to create a whole bunch of opportunities for you, where people might not move all of their manufacturing or might not move all of their services out of these cheaper countries, but they're certainly going to start augmenting it, and they're going to diversify their access to products and to services. So there's a real opportunity for you in that. And then the final thing, of course, is what we've discussed today, which is the future of ESG. So please keep in mind that this is reality, this is an opportunity, and it is something that we have a competitive advantage on here in Scotland. So with all that said, I'd like to thank you for listening to the presentation today, and I hope you know there's plenty of organisations, ourselves included, who are out there to help you guys to deliver not just for yourselves, but for Scotland. And please never be afraid to ask for help and support, and I wish you all the best with it. Many thanks.
Hello, folks. I was just going to reintroduce myself, Sean McGrath. You've just seen me chatting away on the video. Hopefully it wasn't too painful for you all to watch and listen to. And I am delighted to be in a position to answer any questions that you might have that are coming through. And I can, just noticed I'm wearing the same shirt that I was wearing in the video. I can't confirm I have washed it in between the two sessions. So first question has landed, and it is an Entrepreneurial Scotland membership a community benefit? So I'm wondering if that's a kind of a question in terms of providing proof in your tenders that you're benefiting your community. in which case I would say probably difficult to answer. Potentially, it demonstrates your commitment. So being a member of Entrepreneurial Scotland, our organisation, is not actually something you pay for. It's just something that you sign up to. It's a pledge to help and be helped, and it shows that you're part of a wider community. So if you are able to demonstrate that you're interacting and that you're supporting others in their growth, then yes, I would see that as community benefit. I don't know if we have any other questions coming through there. So are there bursaries or funding available to expand into the ESG area, or is it just all on us? So great question. As you will find with almost everything, there are bursaries and funding available, but there's about 75 million different pots of them, and they're nightmare to try and find. So in order to hone in on them, I would suggest that you talk to Business Gateway, who should have some information on that. It's also worth connecting with your local universities about that, because that's quite a hot topic for universities at the moment. ESG is still a very early topic. It's for such an important topic, it's something that everybody hasn't really got to grips, the wider supply chain system hasn't really got to grips with yet. So there will be programs and there will be small pots of money available to help you as SMEs understand what's going on with ESG, but you're going to have to work hard to find them at the moment, I would suggest. So another question that's just come in, do we provide one-to-one support sessions? Yes, absolutely, we do. So one of the things that we look to try and do is connect people with individuals that we think can help them on their journey. The single most important thing that we do is create connections and get out of the way and let people get on with it. So we just try and understand you as individuals, what it is that you need, and then connect you up with individuals that we know that can help you with that. I should say that information on that can be found on the website, or you can email us or reach us out in the socials as well. Another question just landed. What do you think the trend, what do you think the trend will continue as with regards to the fallout from Russia's war with Ukraine? So I think the trend has started and can't be stopped regardless almost now of the outcome. So even if we were to reach a quick resolution with the Russian war, which is not looking very likely at all, it's still going to create an aftermath. So there's going to be two main things that will happen from this. There's the two huge effects. The first one is what's generally referred to as Putinflation. So all of the impact of the Ukrainian war and what impact that's having on inflation and cost of living crisis. You'll probably see that burn out in the next 18 months to 2 years, because there's just even if we came to a peaceful resolution and Putin withdrew all his troops and said, sorry about that, folks, everybody is still going to be trying to wean themselves off of Russian energy. And that's going to create an increase in cost until they can catch up with all of that. But 18 months to 2 years, we should hopefully have a solution in place for that. And then, as I was referring to in the video, the second aspect of this very much is that, the world that we've lived in for the last 40 years, that kind of relatively peaceful, stable world where you can source a supplier wherever you want, it's all based on price. That's kind of gone now. You're really going to see the world start to drift into a kind of an east and west division, and those people in the middle who have to choose a side. So I would suggest that whilst that's a risk and a threat in terms of if you source supplies from places like China, it's also a massive opportunity in the sense that countries such as America and Europe, are huge trading partners. They're also going to have to source new suppliers because they're going to want to mix their pipeline. So they'll still take things from China for sure, but they're not going to do 100% outsourced to somewhere like China. They're going to look for other countries as well as a backstop. So another question, do you have any other tips for someone interested in this? Is it, it's like we want to do something, but we're not really sure how to get started. So this is helpful. It's early days in this. So the biggest tip I would have is that, look, if you have board meetings or anything like that, you add this to your board agenda as a standing item. Keep it as a center of topic. Read up on it, look for articles, look for newspapers, and look for books on it. Avoid chat of ESG investing. It's like this big blanket, that's sort of smokescreen that's hiding the real issue. Try and dig down into the reality of what ESG is about. And that's where you'll start to learn more about actually how do I as an organization measure what I'm doing? How do I prove that I'm doing things from an ESG perspective? Because you will find that your larger customers are going to start asking you about it. I would start asking them about it. So if you work with any large businesses, ask them what it is they're thinking about ESG, if it's becoming an issue for them from a procurement perspective. And again, I would relate back to the natural advantages that you have here now, and they're best shown if you are an international player, because you, on the international stage, you will have a huge competitive advantage, but of course, on the local stage, you will have the same advantage as everybody else. So in terms of the next question, it seems really daunting to think about innovating when business works the way it does. Do you have any tips for businesses trying to think outside the box? Brilliant question. So I'm going to guess that when you say when business works the way it does, you're kind of talking about the fairly traditional view of capitalism, profit first, and you've got to make the buck, and but you want to innovate and do things differently, and change and maybe be more purposeful. Well, the really, really good news for you is that not just ESG, but also this the next gen that's coming through. I can't keep up with all the labels they have on gens these days, but the next gen that are coming through now are a generation of employees that are hugely motivated by purpose. So you can no longer, back in the day, it used to be that you could pay away any problems with a decent wage or a pension or various different financial incentives. You can't do that now. In the current tight labor market, in order for you to innovate and for you to be different, you have to have purpose. So I would say the thing that you need to do most is you need to dig right into what is the purpose of your organization. And that purpose is not to make money. That might be one of the drivers, but that's never a purpose. It has to be, what problem are you solving for society or your customers or for your stakeholders? And if you can find that purpose and put that at the center of your business, then you'll naturally attract better individuals who will help to support your thinking outside the box.